Welcome back to Ethos of Humanity. My name is Katania, and I am joined with Oleksandra Matvichuk, prominent Ukrainian humanitarian rights lawyer and activist. She leads the Center of Civil Liberties in Kyiv and has won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022 for documenting war crimes and human rights abuses. She serves as the vice president of the International Federation of Human Rights since 2022 and sits on the World Movement of Democracy's Steering Committee. She has submitted reports to the UN Committee or Council of Europe, the OSCE, and the ICC, and was Ukraine's first female nominee to the UN Committee Against Torture in 2021. Her honors include the Right Livelihood Award in 2022, the Hillary Rodham Clinton Award, and Times 2023's Influential People's List. Would you be able to share with us a little bit of your background and what led you to this work?
I'm a human rights lawyer, and I decided to study law and to fight for freedom and for human dignity for some obvious reason. When I was a child in a school, I got acquaintance with Soviet dissidents, and suddenly I appeared in the center of fantastic people. And these people were very noble, very kind, and they treat me, being a young girl, with dignity, and they were fantastic because they say what they think and they do what they say. They stood up bravely their voice against the entire totalitarian Soviet machine. And I know from the history that dissident movements were severely persecuted. Part of people were killed, part of people were jailed. Part of people were locked for forcible psychological treatment, but they didn't give up. And being a child in a school, I was so inspired by this example. So that was a moment when I decided to study law and to continue this fight for freedom and for human dignity.
Amazing, amazing. And so would you be able to walk us through the recent war crime your team has documented, like the forced deportation, the Russianification of the Ukrainian children, and if it reveals any of Russia's strategy?
It was a fourth winter of large-scale war, and it was very difficult. Russians' drones and Russian missiles were deliberately hit energy grid, the very infrastructure that civilians depend on their survival. In January and February, temperature drops minus 25 degrees Celsius, so Ukrainian cities were literally freezing. Millions of people have restricted or no access to heating, to water, to electricity. It's a survival issue because you have no practical answer to a very simple question: how to warm milk for your newborn baby. And that is why UN named this type of actions as crimes against humanity. So we survived this winter, the spring has come, but Russians continued to commit horrible crimes. And one recent crimes which were documented, it shows a clear normalization of cruelty which happened in Russian society. It's a story of very elderly couple who were trying on their own to evacuate from occupied village in Sumy region. It was in February, so the man was pulling his wife on a sled to a place where Ukrainian rescuers were waiting for this couple. But one FPV drone dropped explosives directly on this woman. The man cried for an hour and didn't leave his wife's body. And then the second FPV drone struck him directly. And you can ask me why Russians killed this elderly couple who just trying to evacuate from the occupied village. But the answer is simple: because they could.
And it feels like it's merely to spread fear. I had volunteered in 2022 when the full-scale invasion had come out or had happened, and I remember hearing stories of when the Russians had come and struck Bucha and Irpin, and the tanks, missiles ranging in the suburbs, not the downtown core to destroy the infrastructure, but merely to just terrify people.
I was in Kyiv when Russian troops tried to circle my city in February and March of 2022. I refused to evacuate, and with a part of my team, we continued our work on the ground. So when Russian troops were forcibly pushed from Kiev region, we immediately sent mobile groups to Bucha, to Motyzhin, to Irpin, to Vorzel, to other cities and settlements of Kiev region. We were shocked. Because even knowing what's going on, it's a completely different story when you experience what's had happened. Because we found dead bodies of civilians who lay scattered around the streets until their liberation. We found dead bodies of civilians in the gardens of their own households. We found dead bodies of civilians, men and women, with the horrible signs of torture, with their hands tied under their back in mass graves. We found dead bodies of civilians, the whole families with children, in civilian cars, which were deliberately shooting while they're just trying to escape from this dangerous region. So there is no legitimate reason in doing such things. There is also no military necessity in this. Once again, Russians have done these horrible things only because they could.
And in places like Bucha, the entire families were executed in their cars. Some were severely injured and thrown into wells. How do these atrocities continue today, and what makes them distinct from past conflicts?
Probably the intense and scope I will mention, because we are documenting war crimes for 12 years already. And this war started not in February 2022, but in February 2014, when Ukraine got a chance for democratic transition of our country. Because it was after collapse of authoritarian regime, when pro-Russian Ukrainian President Yanukovych escaped to Russia. Due to Revolution of Dignity, people in Ukraine got this chance to build a country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. Putin occupied Crimea, part of the eastern regions of Ukraine, and 5 years ago he extended this war to the large-scale invasion. So we in this documentation field for 12 years, and we see the same patterns, but the scope and intensity is different. Because as in 2014 and now, this is the same task for Russians. They use pain and suffering of Ukrainian civilians as a tool how to break people's resistance and occupy the country. They also understand that there is one task to seize the territories, but completely another task to obtain control over the occupied territories. So let me illustrate it with a question of children who live under occupation, how they try to change their identity to save control over this region. We have 1,600,000 Ukrainian children under Russian occupation. Their identity are erased. They prohibited to speak Ukrainian language. They use Russian textbook, and in Russian textbook, Ukraine is not exist as a state. They also completely militarize, and this policy is starting from the kindergarten. It's a very complex policy. For example, their parents are forced to give their children on regular basis to some camps where children lining up, live in barracks, in military uniform, and study how to use weapons. So they're literally preparing a new generation of Putin soldiers from this 1,600,000 Ukrainian children. And I always emphasize this is not just human rights problem. This is a security problem. Because when these children will turn 14, they will receive Russian passport. When these children will turn 18, they will be forcibly recruited to Russian army. This means that these children will go to fight and to die in any country where Russia will send them to go to fight and to die.
And I remember exploring some of the regions as well and seeing the destruction. And what was so heartbreaking is a lot of the landmarks that were destroyed, it's shared history. You know, I understand that there's a level of there's a level of wanting to remove and discourage the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. But what's so heartbreaking is the fact that it's a shared history between two countries. But because of everything that is being propagandized within Russia, it's completely oppressing personal expression and the ability to realize that this has been a shared history for hundreds of years.
But the truth is that Ukrainians were in shadow of Russian Empire for 3 centuries. And nothing changed, unfortunately, for Russians. And Putin openly says there is no Ukrainian nation, there is no Ukrainian language, there is no Ukrainian culture. And for all these 12 years, we are documenting how these words converted in horrible practice in occupied territories, where Russians physically exterminate active local people, mayors, journalists, children writers, teachers, environmentalists, any active people of community, how they banned Ukrainian language and culture, how they destroyed and robbed Ukrainian cultural heritage, and how they forcibly taken Ukrainian children to Russia, separated them with their families, put them in Russian education camps, told them, you're not Ukrainian, you're Russian children, your families, your parents refused from you, and you will be adopted by Russian families who will bring you up as Russians. So I'm a lawyer. I know that this war has genocidal character, it's obvious, because just from the common sense, there is no necessity to be a lawyer to understand simple thing. If you want partially or completely to destroy some national group, there is no necessity for you to kill all representatives. You can just forcibly change their identity and entire national group will disappear. Let me illustrate it with one story. This is a story of children's writer Volodymyr Vakulenko. He wrote beautiful stories for Ukrainian children. An entire generation of Ukrainian children brought up on his daddy's book. During Russian occupation, he disappeared. I know his family. His family hoped to the last that he is alive, but like dozens of thousands Ukrainian civilians are illegally kept in Russian captivity. But when Ukrainian army liberated Kharkiv region, we found mass grave in forest near Izum with dead bodies of civilians there. And in unmarked grave with the number 319, we found a dead body of this children writer. So it's a deliberate policy of forcible physical elimination of cultural elite of Ukrainian people. It's just one element of this complex genocidal picture.
And Western media often frames this as a NATO-Russian proxy war, but being everything that we've talked about, is there any other key facts that dismantle this misconception?
But it's lie. It's lie, and frankly speaking, I'm tired to explain this, but I know that it's important. One simple fact. In 2014, when Russia attacked Ukraine, Ukraine was a neutral country. Neutrality status was ingrained in our constitution. Nobody planned to join to NATO at all. It wasn't the will of Ukrainian people. It was prohibited on constitutional level. But Putin started this war not because he is afraid of NATO, but because he is afraid of the idea of freedom, which came closer to Russian borders. Because it's simple. The only existence of free world and another type of model how to govern the country, it's always provide a threat to dictators that they will lose their power because their own population can also start to ask unpleasant questions.
Yeah, while I was in Ukraine, I got somewhat of an understanding of everything. And what I find very interesting is in Russia, there's typically only a small demographic of people that actually are running everything. But there are so many different tribes and communities within Russia that are under, the rulership. And so it would lead to further pushback, unfortunately, but it's heartbreaking to see that we're in this position now. And despite Ukraine being neutral and defending its lines, there's still the aggressor that's pushing back and you only being able to stay within your perimeters. But how is Russia shaping global perceptions? How is Russian propaganda shaping global perspectives? And how can listeners spot it? Because a big thing that we're seeing now is there's a lot of misinformation. And I think a lot of people feel like the war has ended, or there's been even a lot of misinformation in regards to the transparency of aid as well. I love these kinds of interviews because we actually are emphasizing the suffering as opposed to just the centralized media that shares facts. And so if there's anything that we can share with our audience in regards to the misinformation and how to spot it, definitely would love to share that.
Let me start with a general problem, which not just about the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which obviously have not just military but informational dimension as well. But the problem is much more general. The problem is that people nowadays spend more and more time in digital reality, and this reality is overloaded with fakes, disinformation, and propaganda from different sides. And this leads to a situation that people start to lose the ability to make a distinguish between lie and truth. And now even the same resident of the small community in Canada have no more a shared picture of reality. But without a shared picture of reality, how these people can do common actions? Without common actions, how we can protect our freedom, democracy, and to respond properly to the challenges to our community? It's impossible. So it's much more global problem. And yes, I know that people start to understand that the war is going on only when the bombs falls on their heads, but as I mentioned before, this war has also informational dimension, and this dimension has no national borders at all. Russia tried to hack Western societies from inside. This is a battle for hearts and minds of people. And the truth is the weakest tool because it becomes the first victim of any war. And that's why I think it's an obligation of every honest people to stand up their voice and support truth. Like my friend and colleague, Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshina. She was young, very talented. She received several international awards for her journalist work, and she was unbelievably brave. She decided that this is her professional obligation as a journalist to come to occupied territories and to tell the truth what Russia is doing with people there. Originally from this region, which is now under occupation, and she disappeared. Now we know that she was abducted by herself, severely tortured, and secretly transported to Russia, where she was kept being a journalist without any official charges. We also know that she didn't receive medical care, and according to the words of her cellmate, her weight was just 30 kilograms. But we still have no idea how she died, because when it happened, Russians refused to return her body to the grieving parents for 6 months. And when Russians returned her body, we found a body of our friend and colleague with the horrible signs of torture, and several internal organs were missing: eyes, brain, and part of trachea. And I tell this story just to illustrate the very simple fact that Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshina, deliberately risking her life to tell the truth what's going on in occupied territories, because she believed that truth matter. She believes that when she provides facts of horror, which is become a part of daily life of millions of people under Russian occupation, it will push us for the right decision and right actions. And just with her journalist work, she can save thousands and thousands of lives. And despite this tragedy, I don't think that she was naive. I do believe that truth matters.
Yeah, and fighting for what needs to be done. I feel too, and I wholeheartedly agree, I think there's such a distorted sense of reality that exists now because we're so immersed in, the digital world. But even with the implement of AI and misinformation, I do feel like people's personal platforms, so long as you know their heart and you know that they're fighting for good, I feel like this will be a crucial part of sharing information and creating change, is actually trusting the people that are on social media and knowing that they're real people and they're not sharing disinformation?
Once again, I think that it's a global problem, and we have to find a way how to return trust between people, how to return this link with reality, which is ruined by fakes and propaganda. And I don't think that this is a task for technical algorithms. I think that we have to involve ordinary people more into different civil work. I mean, different topics, because they have not just to know about reality, they have to become a part of the transformation. This is a better way how to restore this connection. And that's why my organization, we always launch different kinds of initiatives, projects, campaigns, and we massively involve ordinary people into human rights work. And from my own experience, I know that when you can't rely on the legal instruments, you can always rely on people. And ordinary people can do extraordinary things.
Would you be able to share some of the programs that you have? And would you be able to share perhaps a story of, because I'd imagine it, regardless of any individual, I'm sure it substantially impacted and influenced any individual that's taken part.
Let me start with this peace talk which President Trump initiated. Ironically, Trump's year of negotiations became the deadliest year for Ukrainian civilians. According to UN, the numbers of civilians being killed and injured increased in 31% in comparison with the previous year. And this is clearly show that something is going in a not right direction. And the main reason for this is that we completely lost human damage in these peace negotiations. The politicians discussed natural minerals, Russia's territorial claims, geopolitical interests, even Putin's vision of Ukrainian history, but they don't speak about people. They don't care. And we still have no idea what will be with dozens of thousands Ukrainian children who were legally deported to Russia. What will be with people who are dying in Russian prison, illegally detained civilians and prisoners of the war subjected to horrible torture and sexual abuse daily? I personally interviewed hundreds of them. They told me how they were beaten, raped, locked into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled. There were electrical shocks through their genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dragged out with a spoon. So, knowing this detail, I have a clear understanding that part of these people have no chance to be alive till the end of this peace talk. Politicians discuss the question of occupied territories like they speak about empty spaces. But the spaces are not empty. Millions of Ukrainians live there, and these people live in gray zone. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their life, their children, their beloved ones. And Russian occupation is not just about changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rape, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, camps and mass graves. This is Russian occupation. And we must return human dimension into all political processes, and that is why we launched the international campaign, which is called People First campaign. And a lot of people, institutions, grassroots initiatives, civil organizations, human rights defenders from different countries joined to this campaign. And this is our struggle for people in this war, because it's ridiculous that we're discussing a geopolitical interest but not speak about people. I know that politicians forget about people, they see just numbers. So just to illustrate that they are not numbers, I will share a story. Last year, I occasionally met a very small girl, just 5 years old. We worked with case of her mother. Her mother is civilian. They both lived under Russian occupation, and her mother was abducted because she has pro-Ukrainian sympathy, which is not a crime, being a citizen of Ukraine, to have pro-Ukrainian sympathy. It's prohibited under Russian occupation, and Russians organized terror against civilians. So her mother was illegally abducted, detained in inhuman conditions, and severely tortured. When I read her testimonies, I don't understand how she managed to survive, because she went through the multiple gang rape with the very horrible details how this gang rape were conducted. So then she was legally transported to Russia, and now she faces fabricated criminal trial. And I have no doubt, unfortunately, that she will be sentenced to Russian prison, and we try to do something with this case, but we have no legal instrument how to make Russia to release this woman. And when I met her daughter occasionally, probably adults who accompanied this girl told her that I'm an important person, being a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. So she immediately reached me, she hugged me, she started crying, and she started to beg me, please return my mom. And I felt myself broken, because I don't know what I have to answer to this child. I'm a professional human rights lawyer. We are trying hard, but we have no tools how to return her mom. So, not to sheer frustration, we try to overcome this with actions and this voice of different people in different countries, that people must be first, and we must pressure Russia to release these people, to return deported children, to make life of Ukrainians who live under Russian occupation more secure. It's vital and very important.
I can only imagine, and I trust that you are much of an empath. And so being that as one of the difficult components, but probably one of your greatest strengths, it's, I think, what keeps you connected to the people. And so knowing that deep down your North Star or your compass that keeps you going is knowing that there are people here and it isn't just numbers. It is very confusing to see, once again, numbers, facts. It almost creates a sense of apathy. It's almost, I want to say, by design, because we really need to hear these stories. We need to actually find out that there's people, everyday people like any one of us, that are struggling in these situations and not by choice. And this sadly sounds like history repeating itself. This is not the first time that Russia has been using this style of force.
No, all this hell which we face in Ukraine is a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades. Russian troops committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in Central African Republic, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished. They believe they can do whatever they want. Our Russian human rights colleagues and friends published a report, and they analyzed Russian tactics in Chechnya, in Syria, and in Ukraine. And they told, this is the same war crime playbook. The chain of wars, chain of crimes, and chain of impunity. We must break this chain, not just for people in Ukraine, but in order to prevent a next Russian attack to the next nation. Because if it happens, Russia will use the same war crime playbook against this new country, which they will attack. And Putin started large-scale war, not because he wanted to occupy just another piece of Ukrainian land. It's naive to think that he lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers just to occupy Avdiivka or Bakhmut, tiny Ukrainian cities which majority of Russians couldn't find even on the map. Putin is not mad. He's very pragmatic and cynical. He started large-scale war because he wanted to occupy and destroy the whole Ukraine and move further. He sees Ukraine as a bridge to Europe. His logic is historical. He dreams about his legacy. He wants to forcibly restore Russian Empire. And people in other European countries, they are safe only because Ukrainians are still resisting and don't let Russian army to move further.
That is much of the shared knowledge that I have heard as well, that it doesn't end with Ukraine, and God forbid it does, because it will eventually carry on to more. And we see that in other world powers. When does it end? It doesn't. And so I feel like we are in a very unique time in history. Sometimes I think about our past and I think about how history's been erased, and whoever, wins tells the story. And I think we're in a very unique place now with technological advancements that despite the uncomfortable component, and your heart being so connected to the Ukrainian community and telling these stories. I hope that this is something that is archived and documented and not forgotten. It's fully protected so that the chains can be broken.
This is the main thing, because probably it's the most documented war in the human history. And we are documenting not just violations of Geneva and Hague conventions, because there are people behind numbers, behind these violations. And while this war turns people into the numbers, what we are literally doing, we are returning people their names. Because people are not numbers. And life of each person matters. And this is the main sense of our work, that we are invested enormous efforts to understand what happened with an ordinary farmer in a small village in my country. And we are doing this for all people, regardless who they are, their social position, the type of crime they endured, and whether or not media or international organizations interested in their case. Because life of each person matters.
Wholeheartedly agree. And how can everyday Westerners educate communities through social media, local events, policy asks to amplify Ukrainian voices, and, doing so without spreading fatigue?
Fatigue is a very interesting question. I don't understand how people abroad can be tired of Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. It's not living without heating with temperature minus 25 degrees Celsius. Their children are not hiding in bomb shelters when Russian missiles struck schools, residential buildings, churches, museums, hospitals, and kindergartens. They have their normal work, normal life. They can hug their beloved ones, have family dinner. These simple things disappeared for Ukrainians, so we can be tired and have a right to be tired, to live like this in large-scale war, which is far from the norm, but not people who live abroad. So it's not fatigue, it's something else.
I agree. It's a mindset, right? I feel like a lot of information that's circling, it's always kind of looking at, I guess it's a matter of gratitude. And that's part of the reason why I started this channel, and much of sharing these stories is to create perspective, to understand that people in the West do have definitely more. They definitely should be appreciative for what they have.
I think that it's very human nature. Try to concentrate just on your own life and don't think what's going on elsewhere. I'm not criticized. I just say that it's very human, and probably people can afford such behavior in a peaceful time. But we are not in a peaceful time anymore. So people abroad have no luxury to forget what's going on in Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. Because if situation will turn in a even worse direction, it will be them and their children in trenches, because Putin will not stop in Ukraine. He planned to move further, and this is reality, and people can reject this reality, and it's also very human. I saw it in Ukraine. In 2014, when Russia occupied Crimea and part of the eastern region, just in a year, a part of Ukrainian society switched off the war as a news from TV, because they want to concentrate only on their own life. And they tell, we are ordinary people, we just try to live this life, it's only one. And once again, during the peaceful time, probably they can afford it, but it's not peaceful time, it was a time of wars. In 8 years, even those people who switch off the war from TV suddenly understood that they can't do it anymore, because there is no safe place in Ukraine where you can hide from Russian rockets. So it's our joint responsibility. We live in a very interconnected world, and you can't build a paradise, even being an island, if another part of the globe is bleeding. When Putin openly declared that he is ready to war with Europe, the question is Europe ready to defend itself? Because Ukrainians are not born to be a shield. We are dying.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's very powerful. And so what do you foresee in 2026 with much of your work? Is there anything that is happening that's feeling like there's some movement?
Well, let me illustrate it with one story from this winter experience. When Russian first hit energy grid, one photo became viral in the internet, and it was a photo of Kiev school teacher. She was wearing red winter jacket and a warm hat, and she was sitting on tiptoe near a metal stick where she placed her computer right outside, near a shop where a generator was running, and that is why she can get access to internet. And right here, in the freezing cold, sitting on tiptoe near her computer, she was giving lecture to her students. And when I saw these photos and looked to this video, I told to myself, oh my God, Russians came to take everything from us. Our land, our freedom, our future, education of our children. And this ordinary Kiev school teacher decided to give them nothing. And even something simple as teaching lesson to your student became as act of resistance. And this is which provide me with optimism looking in 2026. I don't think it will be easy, it will be difficult, because we are entered the era of global turbulence. Look what's going on in the world. The whole system of peace and security has collapsed. So it's unfortunately easy to predict that such fires like wars and mass violence will emerge more and more often in different parts of the globe, because the system is faulty and sparkling everywhere. And it's going on for obvious reason, because the system was created past century, but even my smartphone has an expiration date. The system has never been reformed, so it's not just stalling and reproducing ritualistic movements. And we get used to thinking through the categories of states and interstate organizations. Ordinary people have a much great power that they even imagine. Ordinary people create history. And that is why, despite everything, the story of Ukraine, it's a life-affirming story, because dramatic times raise hope. Because when freedom is denied, it became powerfully to break out through the every concrete individuals. And hope in Ukrainian language means nadia. Nadia, and dia, it's action in Ukrainian language, which means that hope based on action, which means that we have to change our attitude. It's not wishful thinking. Hope, it's not confidence that everything will be fine. Hope, it's a deep understanding that all our efforts have a huge meaning. And this is probably the main lessons learned from Ukrainians to people in Canada, in United States, in Germany, in Switzerland, in Kenya, in Brazil, that we are not hostages of these circumstances. We are participants of this historical process, and dignity provides us strength and courage to continue our fight, even in unbearable conditions.
I agree. And going back to like, where is your heart in all of this? And with intention, things happen, they cease, the opportunities continue to present themselves. And so having people with that same shared mindset is so crucial right now, because from my understanding, I feel like much, at least of the West, has been very much kind of under a veil of sorts of just kind of ignoring what's currently happening globally. And there's systems that are literally rotting from the inside out. And I do feel like we're reaching a climax. And I think it's an incredible opportunity for us to stand up as the people and unite as humanity. And so if there's any other suggestions that you have in regards for people to, continuously be aware of what's happening in Ukraine, I would love to share that with the audience, because we can't forget any sort of pocket of the world.
Probably I have two main messages. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to people who support us in our fight for freedom. It's very important to know that you are not alone when you're fighting with such enormous military power. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Ukrainians will always remember nations and concrete individuals who were with us in this dramatic time of our history. And my second message is that we still need your help. we still need your help. And I'm not the person who tell others what they have to do. I believe that people know better what they can do in such circumstances. The only thing that sometimes people they compare their efforts with a challenge, and they start to think that their efforts have no sense because they face with enormous opposing challenge. And the truth is that there is no modest efforts when we speak about large-scale war. All efforts matter, and people can do hundreds of methods and be helpful. They can write about Ukraine. They can push their government to help Ukraine more. They can help Ukrainian refugees. They can donate. They can organize a humanitarian initiative. Once again, hundreds of methods of what can be done, and people know better what they can. But the main thing that we need these actions. And yes, I understand that we are human beings, we are not God. And probably with my individual efforts, I can't change this war. But without my individual efforts, nothing will be changed. I will finish with a story of Revolution of Dignity, because that time I was coordinator of civil initiative Euromaidan SOS. We brought up thousands of people to provide legal assistance to persecuted protesters. And every day, hundreds and hundreds of people who were beaten, arrested, tortured, accused in fabricated criminal cases passed through the care. So it was time when the law doesn't work at all. And all state bodies which were designed to protect human rights turned to bodies who try to physically exterminate peaceful protests. And this mood of learned helplessness started to emerge, because people start to think, but what we can do, being human beings, not God, and facing with the entire state machine. And in order to help people to overcome this learned helplessness, Ukrainian artists made a beautiful series of posters. And I remember the poster of drop, with the title, "We are drop in the ocean," which means, yes, we are human beings. And probably my efforts is just drop. But together, we are ocean. Drop to drop means ocean. And together, we can change this reality.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard the Peruvian story of the hummingbird?
No, can you please share?
Yeah, it's there's a forest fire and all the animals have evacuated by a lake, and the hummingbird goes to the lake and drops it one by one by one. And all the animals say, "Why? Why are you doing this? You're so small." And she replies, "Every drop counts." And I feel
Beautiful stories.
I feel like if we all had that mentality, we don't realize how much it equates to. And this is a big part of my TED Talk. We have this idea of immediate results and scaling that. But some things that we do in this life, like you can't measure it. And even so, like you might not be able to measure it and see, but it doesn't mean it surmounts to nothing. So each conversation, any effort, having the ability to give from the hand in any capacity, it does surmount to something. So it's once again that hope, that mindset, that intention.
It's a beautiful way to end this conversation. Thank you for sharing this story. I will remember it.
Thank you. Is there any best way to find out more of your work so that our audience can directly see the efforts that you are contributing?
We have a website of our joint coalition, because we are not doing this work alone. We united our efforts with dozens of organizations from different regions and built national network of local documentators and covered the whole country, including the occupied territories. So it's a Tribunal for Putin initiative, and if you Google this website, you can find website in 7 languages. We're trying hard to disseminate information about what's going on. And also I have a profile in different social networks. So if someone have some advices or recommendation or questions, you can write Directly, I manage my social network by myself, so I sooner or later will see these messages and I will respond.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I will link that in the bio. But I want to genuinely thank you for chatting with us today. And yes, I look forward to seeing more of your work and staying in touch.
Thank you very much for this unique opportunity. I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you.